Good morning, everybody. We'll be kicking off at 2 minutes after the hour. Let everybody kind of get logged in here and get settled in. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday, brought to you by XenTegra. I see a lot of familiar names out there. I may have to start looking at a new intro on each of these webinars, because everybody knows what's going on. All right, let's kick this thing off. All right, so we have the Bronco giveaway from XenTegra. The URL is here. Just to give you an update on that, 2022 is closed, but stay tuned. Keep the link close. We'll be making announcements for the 2023 giveaway. So be aware of it and copy that link. Nope. Also, today we will be giving away 2 $100 Amazon gift cards at the end of our webinar. So you got to make sure that you're staying online the whole time in order to be able to get that gift card. I'm your host for today, John Spallone. Just to give you some background on myself, I live in Baltimore, Maryland. When I say I'm a cloud evangelist on a journey of enlightenment, the cloud is continually shifting and how its delivery is. So I'm always looking at the next of what's coming out there. I've got 25 plus years experience within the industry, everywhere from an admin, consultant, up to architecture. Recently, I was an enablement engineer at Citrix, working with the Citrix Cloud solution and doing our technical training for field resources for all of our customers and partners out there in the community as far as cloud is concerned and the digital workspace. So I also have a couple of dad jokes that are in there. Deal with my kids, they can't stand them, but oh well. And then I find a true balance of geek and nerd with all my comic books as well as technology. And a dad joke for you today: what do you call a line of rabbits jumping backwards? A receding hairline. So a little bit about XenTegra. We are a solutions provider. We deal with services, reseller of hardware, licensing, all of the solutions that are out there, focused within that digital workspace and everything that encompasses from your security, the perimeter, the edge to your customer, in those solutions that you deliver out there for a better productive end user, and also focused on a lot of emerging technologies and disruptive technologies. And speaking of which, today we do have a very good one. Nurdio is with us today. We were founded by Andy Whiteside. Nice little picture of him up here. He was a sales engineer at Citrix and saw the need for enablement for the community. There was a lack of that from partners and from solution providers out there, softwares and hardware, to really enable you on these solutions within the digital workspace and understand what's out there and how it's delivered for your users, your customers, and really enhance your knowledge within this realm that we live. Now, we do value-added reselling, we do micro assessments, complementary. We also have our own hosting services within our data centers, and managed and supported services that we provide too, above and beyond what we do from engineering consulting designed on a project base by base. So with that, what I want to do is hand it over to our good friends at Nurdio today. Today I have Tim Smith and Greg Robertson. They are here to discuss Nurdio and how it enhances an AVD solution. And they're a good partner of ours. So Tim, I believe you're going to take it.
Good morning, everyone. This is Tim Smith, Director of Channel Sales at Nerdio. And I am here happy to be working with XenTegra, an excellent partner of ours. I would like to introduce Greg Robertson. He is our senior sales engineer and possibly the world's foremost expert on AVD deployments. This man has done over 600 deployments. He has done them with Nerdio. He's done them without Nerdio. So he knows how to do an AVD install, what it's capable of, how you can manage it, probably better than anyone else on earth, at least better than anyone I've met. So at the end of Greg's demo here, if you have any questions, if you'd like a deep dive, please feel free to reach out to your XenTegra rep. They'll be happy to schedule a deep dive one-on-one with Greg and Nerdio sales team if necessary. So Greg, please take it away.
Thanks, Tim. Greg Robertson with Nurdio, Enterprise Sales Engineer, supporting XenTegra in their efforts to help pass on the good word of Nurdio to you guys and women, if there are any. I'm not looking at who's actually on, but today we're going to go through a demo of Nurdio, and feel free to ask any questions during the time that I'm demoing. I have no issues with interruptions. Quite often it leads into a better conversation, especially when we're in those particular areas, so that we can talk about those specific items at the time. Also, real quick, so kind of a quick overview of what Nurdio provides for your organizations is not only the ability to deploy Nurdio in your own environment. You own the software. It's not a SaaS solution. No data leaves your environment. And the only thing that Nurdio collects is number of active monthly users. That being said, the bill for Nurdio shows up on your Azure bill as a third-party app or a third-party charge. So it's an easy application and to interact with. The three kind of taglines for Nurdio from a deployment perspective is we make things super simple. We can deploy Nurdio in your environment in 2 or less hours, or XenTegra can as well. And with that, it allows you to ingest your current AVD environment if you have one, or deploy from scratch. Second is ease of management. Nurdio is a nice overlay, provides a simple overlay to manage your AVD, deploy hosts to your pools, deploy storage, as well as scale those environments up and down to help reduce cost, which leads into the third point of what Nurdio offers from a value perspective. Nurdio does have the ability to shut down and spin up your virtual machines in your environment, as well as increase and decrease your storage based off latency to ensure that you have enough performance on the back-end storage to maintain the user experience that your users expect when going to a different type of environment compared to their on-prem solutions. With that, I'll go ahead and jump right into the presentation and the demo. So this is Nurdio Manager for Enterprise. This is going to be the dashboard that you see over on the top left over here. And we'll go down through a number of these items on the left side and hit some of the high topics. And feel free again to ask questions if you see a specific item of interest. The dashboard is going to give you a number of just, generic, graphs related to, how many named users you have, what your host count is, how many host pools you have, monthly active users in relation to your named user count as well, and as well as your CPU cores. One of the things to keep in mind is up here at the top, we have what we call our auto scale savings dashboard. And even though this is a demo environment, you'll notice that our cost per user is quite high because it's a demo environment. However, if you notice, we are saving at least 50%. We can do that for your environment all day long. It does vary, generally anywhere from 40 to 80% cost savings of your AVD infrastructure cost. But typically, I'm quite confident in saying that typically easily 50% of your AVD cost all day long across generally 95, 98% of our customer base. Moving down, we'll go to Workspaces, and this is where we'll start looking into deploying a workspace through the demo and can give you a sense of how simple it is to deploy within Nerdio. First thing we want to do is add a workspace, and we'll let me give this, what's today's date? The 30th, 0330 GR. This is my first demo today's. So you can give it your host pool a name and then simply give it a friendly name as well. The friendly name is what your end users will see. Your resource group, as well as the location that you want your metadata for AVD to be stored in. And then the last option is the ability to add and apply tags to not only the workspace, but you'll be able to apply them to your host pool as well as the hosts that get deployed in your environment. So if you're in an organization that requires tags, you can set them once within Nerdio and we will automatically deploy those dynamically as we deploy resources in your environment. We'll go ahead and select OK and reach out to Azure to get the workspace set up. Once that's complete, we'll automatically move over to deploying a host pool. So we have our workspaces. We have the workspace that we just deployed. And then we're ready to deploy a host pool and virtual machines in this environment. Over on the left, if you notice, we have static pools and dynamic host pools. Static pools are going to be those host pools that have absolutely no auto scaling of any sort. They're going to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with no savings inherent to that particular type of host pool. The next host pool is a dynamic host pool from a Nurdio perspective. This is where we're going to apply our intelligence and our code to spin up your virtual machines and spin them down based off a number of triggers, whether that be CPU, RAM, user-driven, a number of different triggers to do that. So let's go ahead and we'll add a dynamic host pool, and we'll give this host pool name of pool 1, a description if you'd like, and then we start looking at the default configuration for this particular host pool. You'll get this for every host pool when you set it up initially. This is part of what Nerdio uses on an ongoing basis to offer some of the features and functionality within the product itself. First, we start with our desktop experience. We offer 4. Azure Virtual Desktop offers 3. The 3 that Azure Virtual Desktop offers is the multi-user desktop pool, the remote application pooled, application streaming as a different term, and then single user personal desktop. Single user desktop personal is going to be the host pool where it's a 1 user to 1 virtual machine, and that user is tied to that virtual machine for the life of that virtual machine, giving that user the ability to have admin level access, install their own applications, and do a much more customized deployment of AVD. Typically, you'll see this in a dev environment where you have developers that want to utilize their own applications and whatnot for deploying their code. If you have an environment where you need the 1-to-1 ratio, 1 user to 1 virtual machine, but not necessarily an individual that needs admin level access to the operating system, we offer a single user desktop pooled environment. So this is going to be where the user is assigned to a single virtual machine. They're not going to have admin level access and control, but if they're running high intensive CPU or memory applications and they need that individualism, we can provide it through this pool. And when they're done, we can pull that virtual machine out of the host pool, delete it, recreate it, and then put it back into the host pool as a net new, untouched virtual machine. Think of it as a stateless host pool environment, right? So it's a stateless virtual machine. Once the user's done with it, we clean it up and put it back in as an untouched virtual machine. We'll go ahead and select multi-user. This is by far the more popular host pool type. It does provide you a better cost savings because you're utilizing more than one user on a host. And then we get down to our Active Directory in Fslogix configuration. Active Directory provides the ability to join your VMs to the domain. You may have multiple, the need for multiple profiles, meaning either a different service account or organizational unit that you want to add those VMs to when they join the domain per pool. So you can have multiple profiles to change those credentials and OU settings per host pool if you so chose. We'll go ahead and select and go with the default in this example. Fslogix, same thing. If you're not terribly familiar with Fslogix, it's an application and company that Microsoft bought a number of years ago, and it effectively offloads a user's profile from the virtual machine to a virtual disk that is stored within Azure. Just like the Active Directory, you may have different host pools that require different storage locations, meaning you may have a split configuration between for different offices that are globally. And so you would want to store those virtual disks profiles closer to the user, so you have the ability to create multiple profiles and specify those different storage locations from a customization perspective. Again, we'll select default on that as well. And then because this is a multi-user pool, we'll select a prefix for the virtual machines in your pool. I'll select multi. We will add a dash and 4 alphanumerical characters to the end of it automatically when we deploy the virtual machines. That helps keep naming convention straightened out and no contention within the environment. Moving down is our network. Network actually has a very important piece to Nerdio. We don't generally, when deploying into different regions, ask specifically for the region and the network. We set this up from a configuration perspective on the outset of configuring Nerdio. And so when you want to deploy a host over to, say, East Europe or North Europe, you would just select the network for which that region has, and then that's where the virtual machine is deployed to. Desktop images. We'll go into this a little more in detail when we get over here to our desktop images conversation, but if Nerdio is managing, which it can manage your desktop images from front to back, fully automated from creating the images to deploying the images, those images that we're managing will be at the top of the drop down for desktop images. Below that will be Azure Marketplace images. These are all the images that Microsoft offers for Azure Virtual Desktop, and we obviously support all of those as well. Moving down below Marketplace images, we have custom images, and we have image gallery images, as well as unmanaged image gallery images. These are images that Nerdio is not necessarily managing. However, in image gallery perspective, it could be a previous version of an image that Nerdio is using. So we do allow and support deploying images into image gallery, or compute gallery as it's now called. And then once you, the customer, updates that image, we will make that new image active, make the previous image inactive, and then that inactive image is still around for distribution if you needed to roll back, and it'll show up down here at the bottom under unmanaged images. We'll go ahead and select a Windows 11 Gen 2 desktop image out of the gallery for this demo, and then selecting the virtual machine size. This will be the size of the virtual machines that are in this particular host pool. They will all be exactly the same. Any image or any VM size that is supported within your location or your environment will be available to you. And you can simply just select which size virtual machine you'd like. Moving down to our OS disk, it is highly recommended to utilize premium SSD. And so we'll select the standard 128 gig P10 disk, which is premium SSD, to give you the better performance from a desktop experience perspective. Next, we'll ask what resource group that we want to deploy these VMs into. And then if this is a brand new host pool, we give you the ability to add users up front or groups up front. So it doesn't have to be individual users. They could be Active Directory groups that you've created and synced with Azure Virtual or with Azure Active Directory. But this is only going to be a quick assign just because it's a new pool. Otherwise, you can add and remove users at a later date as well. And then lastly, we have the tags that I previously mentioned. We'll go ahead and select OK. And what Nerdio does is we reach out to Azure via Graph API to configure this environment. So all we're doing right now is adding a host pool, creating a application group that's associated with that host pool for the users. And then we roll over, once that's done, to our auto scale configuration. As you can see up here in the top right, there's an on and an off button. By default, auto scale is always turned off, whether it's an ingestion of a existing host pool or the deployment of a new host pool. That's the beauty. You do have the flexibility of turning it on and off. In this example, I'm going to go ahead and change this 5 to a 3, and I'm going to click Save. While we are talking about the autoscale process, Nerdio is literally going out to deploy 3 virtual machines as we speak with this particular configuration. One thing I'd like to note out is this is, again, the default configuration. Over on the right, you'll see general estimated cost. If based off your host pool sizing down here below, will give you your minimum and your maximum cost. You as a customer will at some point land somewhere in the middle from a total cost perspective, but we give you minimum and maximum, whether or not they're all turned off or all turned on. One thing to note is some of the features of Nerdio provides, starting in the auto scale configuration, is managing the running OS disk type. So you always want to have the highest performance disk when the virtual machine is turned on, which we do here. However, keep in mind that 70% of the time in a week, these virtual machines will be turned off. So there's no need to save or to spend the funds for a premium SSD when those VMs are turned off 70% of the time. Nerdio offers a option to change that OS disk type. So when we shut the virtual machine down, we can change that disk type to a standard HDD. When we spin it back up, we convert it back to a premium SSD. If you notice, that drops your storage costs dramatically from a perspective of when the VMs are turned off. Again, 70% of the time they are turned off. This is a huge cost savings option within Nerdio. Next, we have another couple of options from a configuration default config, reusing host names to help keep your AD environment cleaned up, and then automatically reimage use host. This can be used in a number of different configurations, but this is one of those options that says this is a stateless virtual machine. When the user logs out, automatically reimage that host, put it back in the pool as a net new, untouched virtual machine so that it is always new for the next user. Any questions on the default configuration of autoscale up here at top before we move on to the detail autoscale options?
Yeah, Greg, we have a ransomware prevention protection as a question. What's your question? Well, that is the question. Jack, if you can get a little bit more elaboration on that, that'd be great. We have another question from Casey. How is deploying on the back end with ARM template or ADO pipeline, API call, or something else?
So we're using Graph API to reach out to Azure to deploy everything. We are going to incorporate ARM as well. As you know, anything that you do within Azure that creates a resource requires ARM, but we do that on the back end automatically for you.
Okay. And that looks like what we've got right now. We'll follow back up with Jack. I asked him to explain a little bit more, but
Okay.
Going good, Greg.
Thank you. All right, moving down, we have I believe five different sections under auto heal, or not auto heal, auto scale. We'll start out with the host pool sizing. Because we're spinning virtual machines up and down, we give you a number of options. You always have to have a base host pool capacity. That is a requirement of Azure Virtual Desktop. That's what we have here in the host pool. Because we're spinning virtual machines up and down, we give you the option to determine how many virtual machines you always want active. This number can be from anywhere from 0 to the maximum number of your base capacity. This allows for access to users when it's off hours or over the weekend to ensure there's at least a resource up and running. If you have that number set to 0, we fall back on Azure Virtual Desktop Start VM on Connect, and it will automatically start the virtual machine for the user. If it's not enabled, give them a message, wait for it, please wait while we turn on your virtual machine, and then they get access in. But again, this can be anywhere from 0 to the maximum number in your base host pool capacity. Our next option is burst beyond capacity. This is a very interesting option. We can build virtual machines as needed during the day and remove them during the day when they're not needed. So when you run out of resources up here in your base host pool, in this example, we'll build out an additional 2 virtual machines as needed. And then when the resources aren't needed, we'll actually remove those. We call that, this configuration, our just-in-time deployment. If you can think of, maybe give you an example of, let's say you needed, 300 virtual machines in a particular host pool. Well, rather than deploying 300 virtual machines and incurring the additional storage costs, you can drop that down to 100 virtual machines and then change your burst beyond capacity to 200, reducing your overall cost and spinning up VMs only when they're actually needed, or building them out only when they're actually needed. And change those back real quick. And then we'll move down to our scaling logic and how we auto scale in relation to our host pool sizing. We do have the ability to scale on multiple triggers, 3 to be exact. Those 3 are scaling based off CPU, RAM, or average active session, or any combination of these 3 at any given time. If you're looking for just a single auto scale trigger, you can do it off those same 3 triggers, as well as available sessions or even user driven. User driven being when the last user logs out after a certain amount of time that you've defined, we'll shut that virtual machine down, or even rebuild it if that's a option that you have selected. We'll go ahead and select available sessions as an example, and we'll change these available sessions per virtual machine to 5. So each one of these will have 5, giving us a total of 25 sessions available in the entire configuration. Moving down, we have our maintain up to X available sessions, either always or during business hours. And let's change that to 5 as well, and give you a walkthrough of kind of how that works. Then we have our load balancing. We'll go ahead and select depth first so that we stack users on a virtual machine before we start spinning up additional ones. And so as users log in, if you can imagine, in the morning, users come in, nobody's logged on, we have 1 virtual machine running. When the first user logs in, that'd be the first of the 5, that gives us 4 user sessions available. After that first person logs in, we will automatically spin up that second virtual machine. And we will continue this process to maintain at least 5 available sessions, even if that includes having to build out the burstable VMs up to a total host pool size of 25 active sessions. Next is our scaling restrictions. It's essentially really two different time frames. You can have Nerdio scale in and scale out, or turn on and turn off your virtual machines, either anytime, all the time, or during a specific time period. So what you can do is, from this perspective, you can define 8 to 5 p.m. We will postpone shutting down virtual machines during this time frame, but come 5 p.m., we will start shutting virtual machines down. Most customers typically go with any time for the best cost savings. Then we have our scale in aggressiveness. We have 3 aggressiveness settings: high, medium, and low. They all trigger off session activity. So within Azure Virtual Desktop, you have available sessions. You have, let's see here, you have active sessions, idle sessions, disconnected sessions, and no session whatsoever. High aggressiveness will look at the environment, and it will scale in or shut down virtual machines that have everything, with the exception of those virtual machines that have active sessions on them. Medium is going to be a bit more forgivable, and if the virtual machine has active sessions or disconnected sessions, medium will not show those, shut those virtual machines down. And then our next option is low, is effectively saying, look at the environment. If there's a session of any sort on that virtual machine, we're not going to shut it down. Let's wait until there's absolutely 0 sessions whatsoever before we shut that down. Medium is a nice middle of the road option, allowing for shutting down those VMs that have no sessions or just disconnected. And so most customers go with that. Moving down, we also have the ability to pre-stage host, again, with multiple schedules if you'd like, but you're essentially defining, say, work hours Monday through Friday, what time does the beginning of work start, or even if it's an education environment where you want to do a training class or something, you can have Nerdio pre-stage, or at least turn on those virtual machines at a specific time. So we'll take a look at the work hours, or at least the time you want it to start, and how many virtual machines you want to have running at that time. We will start those virtual machines, make sure they're available by the time and on the schedule that you define, and then give you an option to scale in or delay your scale in for up to 2 hours, ensuring that you give your users time to come in and log in and have an active session. We will always scale out, but during this delay time, we will not scale in. Moving down, we have our standard messaging. So when users are being asked to log off, you can obviously modify that to your specific scenario, as well as define how long they have before the host scales in and forces the user off. Last option we have in auto scale is what we call auto heal broken host. It is not a question of if you're going to have one. It is a question of when you're going to have one and how often you're going to have one. It's just a function of AVD, or I don't even want to say feature, but it's sometimes on the back end, the AVD agent may lose connection or may have an upgrade that failed. We have a number of triggers that you can utilize to help determine what a failed host looks like with or without sessions. But essentially, if we meet these criteria, we give you the only 2 options that you really have in Azure Virtual Desktop to rectify that. It's effectively rebooting it or rebuilding it. We can restart the virtual machine. If that doesn't work, then we can remove the virtual machine, rebuild it, and put it back into the host pool, which generally every single time does address and fix that particular issue, allowing for your IT organization to have less daily monitoring and tracking of resources. So when you have an unavailable host, a lot of times those go unnoticed for quite some time, costing your company money when they're not available, but yet taking up resources and bandwidth within your environment. So we have the ability to auto heal, reboot, rebuild, and move forward. Before we move off of the auto scale configuration, do we open it up for any additional questions?
Yeah, Greg, we got a clarification from Jack. Does Nerdio provide any kind of ransomware protection as an option, or is it strictly AVD?
It is strictly AVD. So we are just a management plane on top of your AVD environment for malware and that type of stuff. You would either look into your current configuration or options within Azure outside of Nerdio. This is just deployment and management of AVD.
Okay. And then we have another question. With the AVD solution, if a user is remote and needs to print to a local printer, is there an effective way to print locally?
There is. So that's interesting. Very good question, actually. Nerdio, just up front, to be honest with you, Nerdio has absolutely zero interaction with any process inside of Azure Virtual Desktop. That includes printing. However, within Azure Virtual Desktop, Microsoft not only offers universal print that you can set up, but it also provides the ability for the user to print to their local printer if your organization allows for the redirection of those printers. So those are going to be RDP settings that you're going to define within the environment. We do offer the ability to set those, make those settings, but it is completely outside of Nerdio from a management perspective.
Great. Thanks, Greg. That's all we've got for now.
All right. So we'll go ahead and cancel out of this, and then we'll go over. I want to run through a number of some of these options on the host pool. So just to give you a quick walkthrough again, when you log into Nerdio, from a management perspective, you're going to go to Workspaces. You're going to select your workspace specifically, and then to the right of your host pool, you're going to do 99% of your management in this drop-down menu. From a managed perspective, adding users or groups to this particular host pool for access. If you want to utilize Fslogix application masking, we can configure that for you here. App attach configuration, your app groups. Typically, you're never really going to look at app groups, in all honesty, but you can. And then tags, custom tags. So anything you put in custom tags, we will automatically deploy this tag into the host pool when we add those resources. Autoscale is next. We've already gone through the configuration. We do offer a history graph, so you can have a graphical representation of when systems are spun up and spun down with the number of users to have a visual reference of whether or not Autoscale is doing what you're expecting it to do and working it the way you would like it to. RI Analytics is a very popular option within Nerdio. Although we do not have a history of virtual machines in this host pool, typically the recommendation is once you have Nerdio deployed, give it 2 or 3 months, get your environment settled and defined what the final run rate's going to look like, the VM sizes, and that type of stuff. Once you have that process running or defined, Nerdio can go back and look at your host pool environment and make recommendations for you to go purchase reserved instances within Azure. It's very difficult to figure out what's appropriate, what's not appropriate from a reserved instance perspective. And most customers are hesitant to do it because they don't want to sign up for a 1 or a 3-year reserved instance pricing. However, with Nerdio, we have the view into what is on, what is off at any given time. And we will use that information and provide you a solid recommendation. Go purchase X number of CPU cores of this particular VM series in this particular region. RIs are no longer tied to individual virtual machines. They are now tied to VM series and the number of cores. And so they do float around, right? So you don't necessarily have to have one virtual machine running 24/7. You can have the reserved instances float around to the VMs in that series to gain additional cost reduction. If you sign up for a 3-year reserved instance with Microsoft, that is an additional up to 64% reduction in utilization pricing. Very, very useful from that perspective. Then we have our host resize reimage, and this is where I'm going to end on the host pool side, and we're going to work this backwards from an image management perspective. So if we go down to host, resize reimage, we give you the opportunity to resize the desk or reimage every host in the host pool by selecting the desktop image that you have deployed, or resize all the VMs or change the OS disks. Moving down, you can do these in groups. So you can do these in groups and say, we'll do them in this size group. We'll stop if there's one failure. And then when that first group is done, we can also set everything else in that host pool to drain mode after that first group is done. So we'll pull this first group out, reimage, put those back into the host pool, drain mode the remaining VMs in that host pool so that any user that comes in or that was asked to log out will land on one of the newly reimaged VMs, and then we'll just do the next group until we have the rest of the environment modified or updated. One thing I'd like to add is scheduling as well. You can schedule this image. Now, granted, a little background on this, we do provide a date and time stamp from a human perspective, so you can see when this virtual machine or image was created. Nerdio doesn't really care about that. We always select the latest and greatest image. We care about the desktop image name. So when you select this, it's really all about the image name. And then we have the ability, and the reason that is important because we haven't created or scheduled the updated image just yet. Again, we're doing this kind of backwards. So let's just say we want to repeat this re-imaging of the host pool on a monthly basis, first Thursday of every month. But let's deploy this at, say, 5 a.m. So 5 a.m., first Thursday of every single month, we'll deploy this, the latest version of the image for this host pool. Once we have that schedule configured, let's go over to desktop images and discuss how the front side of that process works. I'll go into it a little more detail here in a second, but when you click on power off, set as image, you have that very similar schedule that we just saw. We can again go down, select, do it on a monthly basis, first Thursday of the month, but let's do this at 1 a.m. So let's create the image first Thursday of every month at 1 a.m. The host pool is going to deploy it first Thursday of every month at 5 p.m. Once you set this, it will run until you terminate that particular schedule. We also have the ability to run scripts on the VM prior to creating the image. You can have your own scripts that you write and also include those within Nerdio to have selectable within the script options. Moving down, we can also deploy this to an image gallery or compute gallery and have that pushed out automatically. That way, we'll use those local images in those remote resources, regions to deploy rather than having to come all the way back to the source. We'll use the ones that are directly in image gallery. With image gallery, you also have a couple other options. Do you want to save this image as inactive, meaning not the latest and greatest? Or do you also want to create a backup of the existing VM image prior to deploying it as well? Highly recommended. Install any app attached certificates, and then whether or not you want to leave this virtual machine running after we create the image. That's important if you have an environment that's using, say, SCCM to update your images with the latest security and virus definitions. You would want to leave that virtual machine running because you'll have that system configured with SCCM to receive those updates. Now, how do we actually create the image? We have the ability to add from an existing virtual machine in Azure or from the Azure library, either case. Once you add a VM from one of those options, it shows up as a virtual machine under desktop images. It will either be on or off. If it's off, you can turn it on. The question is how do you update this virtual machine? You just simply click on it or log into the private IP address via RDP, install and configure your applications. When you're done, log out of this virtual machine, come over and press power off, set as image. One thing to keep in mind, This is a virtual machine. It is always a virtual machine. It is never sysprepped. What we do is when we create an image, we shut this virtual machine down. We create a snapshot of it. We run sysprep against the snapshot and then deploy the image from that sysprep snapshot to create your image, leaving you a modifiable image over here on the left. So if 5 minutes later you realize you forgot to make a particular configuration setting or needed to add an additional application, you just simply log in, add the application, make your configuration, power off, set as image as well. This way you can automate the process front to back and just let it do its thing. Any questions on desktop imaging?
Yes, we have one. If a customer wants virtual desktops in Azure and AWS, does this product help with both clouds?
It does not. Nerdio Manager only supports Azure Virtual Desktop at this point in time. Great question, though. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Let's move down to scripted actions. And also one quick note for you, Windows 365 Cloud PC. I'm not going to go into a huge portion of this. This is an hour by itself, but we can deploy Windows 365 Cloud PCs, manage the provisioning policies, make the network connections, re-image those virtual machines, as well as provide additional licensing reduction on those 365 VMs through a number of unique techniques of assigning, unassigning, or reassigning those licenses. We can typically save upwards of 55% on your licensing for Windows 365. If you have interest in that, feel free, please reach out to me and we can get a meeting set up to go over that in more detail. Scripted actions, we have Windows scripts and Azure runbooks. We do provide several dozen scripts with the product right out of the gate. Give you a quick example of one of them, shrink Fslogix profiles. This particular script, you can schedule to run as often as you'd like. We will reach out to Azure, create a temporary virtual machine, copy the script over to it. That script will then mount each one of the Fslogix profiles. If they're not locked, shrink that Fslogix profile down and get rid of all of the white space, and then move on to the next one. When that process is done for all the profiles, we will then go back and clean up that temporary virtual machine and delete it from the environment. But we have all kinds of different scripts, all the way from installing applications, enabling screen protection, a number of different things. Next is monitoring. Nerdio supports 2 different monitoring agents, AVD Insights, as well as Sepago. I'm a huge fan of Sepago. When Azure Virtual Desktop originally came out, Sepago was the only monitoring agent that supported it. Then Microsoft came along with Insights. However, Sepago still, in my opinion, has more feature-rich options, specifically around performance statistics. If you're looking for information in relation to how the virtual machines were running performance-wise, whether it's an application, a host, or a user, you can get that. As an example, we'll just take a look at applications. Click on Applications with Sepago, shoot you over to the Azure portal, and then load the workbook associated with that particular report. In the applications report, you'll get your total CPU memory and disk I/O utilization. You also have some additional options for anything that was run from an application perspective within that host pool. As an example, Outlook will tell you how many users, or at least how many times it was run, or how many users, 3, and what those 3 users were, not only on the CPU utilization there, but for the individual users on top of that. As well, moving down, you can also look at specific users as to what they've done, more than just one application. Any application that user logged in, we will list what that application was, what the performance statistics were associated with each one of those executions. Super powerful, but we can do that not only with applications, hosts, and users. So if you're looking for user information from a debug perspective, you can select the user workbook, give you some detail on the user activity, total sessions, logins, logouts per day, session durations, as well as specific stuff on individual users. So again, I'll pick on my buddy George here. So when George logged in, his average connection time, and some specifics about his connection. But because we selected George here, you'll also notice more information about George. He had four sessions. Each session has a different line item that you can also look into and gain insight as to how that session performed for that user. Moving down to storage is we do support Azure Files Standard, Premium, and Azure NetApp Files. We can deploy either one of those directly from the portal, and we can also auto scale those storage accounts. As an example, we'll take a look at this top one over here, auto scale, configure. We can configure the provision quota size, automatic quota increases, or very specifically increase the storage based off latency and then decrease storage based off latency, based off what the storage is doing from, say, as an example, a logon storm in the morning. Another nice thing to also keep in mind is we do have the ability to fully deploy either one of these. If you've ever tried to deploy Azure Files and join it to your domain, if you know what you're doing and you've done it quite a few times, best case scenario, it takes about 45 minutes to set up. Best case, it can last hours or days. We do it in about 20 minutes in a completely automated fashion. Next and last, before we open it up one last time, is RBAC roles. We do offer a number of built-in RBAC roles within Nerdio for AVD admin, desktop admin, end user, help desk, and reviewer. But beyond that as well, we offer the ability to create your own definitions. And so you can create your own definition and define all the way down to the specific host pool as to what those particular users have access to if you give them a login to Nerdio. With that, I'll open it up for additional questions.
Greg, we've got, does Nerdio track the imaging versioning? Basically, if they wanted to roll back to an earlier image version, is that capability within it?
We do. So we offer a number of things, especially if you put it in a image gallery. When you update that image, the previous image becomes a quote unmanaged image. So you can deploy from a previous version, as well as if you elect to create a backup, any of those previous versions also get listed under the custom images drop down underneath marketplace images for you to go select that specific previous version. And we provide the versioning capability within those that you can add descriptive to know kind of what's happened, what's changed. But yes, we do offer that capability.
Okay, that's all we've got right now.
All right. If there's no further questions, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you. But if you have any questions, absolutely feel free to reach out to me, Greg Robertson, at Nerdio or XenTegra for additional questions to take a look at maybe setting up a proof of concept or whatnot. XenTegra can help you with that as well.
Great, thanks, Greg. If you can hand back over so I can do some screen sharing.
Yes, bear with me a second.
Sure thing.
There we go. Thank you.
All righty. Okay, folks. All right, so we've got pretty much all the questions handled throughout it. And like Greg had mentioned, if you guys have any, or gals, people, anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us or our partners over at Nurdio. We can definitely help you out with that as far as getting those things addressed for you. So with that, let me close out Ooh, don't like those fonts. Anywho, I wanted to bring up upcoming events that we have for April from XenTegra. We have our webinar Wednesdays. We have Logitech, VMware, LG, Control Up, and Liquidware coming to you next month. Keep note that there is a fluctuation of time there with each one of those. You can find this on our events page on our webpage at XenTegra.com. Workshops and boot camps will be coming up as well for the month of April. We have endpoint security with iGel OS, Nutanix Era Technology Boot Camp, Nutanix 101 workshop, and not Control Up, I apologize, Nurdio. We do have Nurdio coming up with a workshop next month as well. So again, you can get all that information on our events page from XenTegra.com. So with that, Kathy, I want to give it back over to you. We will be doing our Wheel of Winners. We'll have 2 winners today for Amazon gift cards at a value of $100 each.
Thanks, John, and thanks everybody for being here today. And I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. Here we go. And I'm going to spin the wheel twice. And once again, each winner will receive a $100 Amazon gift card. So here we go with the first spin. And George C. is our first winner.
Congratulations.
Okay. And then we'll do it one more time. Stephen K. is the
Stephen
winner.
K.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. So again, I want to remind you to check out our events page for the upcoming events, webinars, and workshops, boot camps that'll be coming up for the month of April. And I appreciate everybody's time today. And Greg, I appreciate your time to be with us today to go into some depth within Nerdio.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks
for having me.
Everybody have a great Wednesday.